Today, we will explore Plato's views on art and aesthetics, particularly his sharp critique of mimetic art, as outlined in the Republic, Book X, Stephanus 595a, 608b. As we dive into Plato's ideas about art being an imitation of an imitation, I want to emphasize how crucial it is to engage with the primary texts that form the foundation of his philosophy. For this lecture, I recommend you carefully study the Republic, Phaedrus, Stephanus 250, and Symposium, Stephanus 210a, as these dialogues contain essential insights into Plato's metaphysical framework, his theory of forms, and his nuanced appreciation of beauty. In the Republic, Plato famously critiques art for being twice removed from the truth, asserting that it leads us away from the world of forms and into a deceptive realm of illusions. Meanwhile, in Phaedrus and Symposium, Plato presents a more positive view of beauty's role in guiding the soul toward the divine. By reading these texts closely, you will deepen your understanding of how Plato's metaphysical and ethical concerns are reflected in his views on art and aesthetics. Art, for Plato, isn't just a matter of representation. It touches on the essence of truth, the soul, and society. As we consider these themes, I encourage you to consider the tension between art as an imitation and art as a means of philosophical reflection. Let us proceed with today's lecture, in which we'll unpack these ideas and explore Plato's critique's impact on his philosophy and the broader field of aesthetics.
Lecture 31, Art and Aesthetics, Plato's Critique of Art. Good afternoon, students. Today, we are turning our attention to a subject that remains as controversial as it is enduring, Plato's views on art and aesthetics. From the ideal forms to his sharp critique of mimetic art, Plato's ideas on art reveal much about his overall philosophy and his view of the role that art should, or should not, play in society. Plato's critique of art comes primarily from the Republic, specifically in Book X, Stephanus 595a, 608b, where he deals with the relationship between art, truth, and the soul. To understand his perspective, we must first consider Plato's theory of forms, as it is the foundation for his critique of the arts. The theory of forms and its relevance to art. Plato's metaphysical framework revolves around the existence of eternal, unchangeable forms, or ideals, that exist beyond the material world. Everything in our world, according to Plato, is an imperfect copy of these perfect forms. For example, there is a perfect form of beauty, and all beautiful things we encounter in life are mere reflections of that ideal beauty. This distinction between the world of forms and the world of appearances forms the crux of Plato's critique of art. In the Republic, Plato asserts that art is an imitation of an imitation, Stephanus 596b. He argues that the physical objects around us are already imperfect copies of the forms, and art, being a representation of these physical objects, is twice removed from reality. To Plato, this makes art inherently deceptive, as it presents us with images that are far removed from the truth. For instance, when a painter creates an image of a chair, they are not creating a chair but rather a representation of a physical chair, which itself is a flawed copy of the ideal form of a chair. Thus, the painting is 2 steps removed from the truth of the ideal form. Art, in Plato's view, misleads us by pulling us further away from the forms and reality, promoting illusion rather than truth. As Plato famously puts it, art is a shadow of reality, and the artist is like someone who creates mere phantoms, Stephanus 597e. Art as a deception of the soul. Plato's critique extends beyond the metaphysical to the psychological. Art, he argues, can corrupt the soul by appealing to the emotional and irrational parts of our psyche, rather than the rational and intellectual. He emphasizes this point in Book X of the Republic, Stephanus 602c, where he contends that poetry, in particular, manipulates the lower parts of the soul, those parts concerned with desire and emotion, rather than nurturing the soul's rational and virtuous elements. Plato saw the potential for art, especially tragic poetry, to stir up emotions like pity, fear, and anger, which can destabilize an individual's inner harmony. In his ideal society, outlined in the Republic, harmony between the soul's rational, spirited, and appetitive parts is essential for justice and personal well-being. Art, by playing on our emotions, encourages us to indulge in the irrational and the non-virtuous. This is not to say that Plato was entirely against art or beauty. In fact, in his dialogue Phaedrus, Plato speaks highly of beauty, especially in its ability to draw the soul towards the divine and the forms, Stephanus 250d. However, his criticism of mimetic art rests on its failure to inspire contemplation of the forms and its tendency to lead us further into the realm of illusion. Plato's concerns about art and society. Plato's concerns about art were not purely individual, but also social. He believed that the kinds of art people consumed had profound effects on their character, and by extension, on the moral fabric of society. In the Republic, Plato goes so far as to propose censorship of certain forms of poetry and drama in his ideal city-state. He famously advocates for the banishment of the poets from his ideal republic, Stephanus 607b, arguing that they could have a corrosive effect on the citizens' virtue. According to Plato, if citizens were exposed to certain types of art, particularly those that glorified vice or depicted the gods behaving immorally, they would be less likely to cultivate virtue themselves. In Book 2 of the Republic, Stephanus 378d, he critiques Homer and the tragic poets for representing the gods in ways that make them appear deceitful, jealous, or morally questionable. Plato believed that these representations of the gods could lead people to emulate immoral behavior, undermining both personal virtue and societal harmony. For Plato, the ideal society requires art that encourages virtue, rationality, and a proper understanding of the divine. This art must not deceive or appeal to base emotions, but rather uplift and align the soul with truth and the forms, the role of the philosopher and the artist. An important distinction Plato makes is between the philosopher and the artist. The philosopher seeks truth through reason and dialectic, aiming to understand the forms and align the soul with them. The artist, by contrast, is engaged in creating imitations of the material world, which are far removed from the truth. Plato likens the artist to a craftsman who builds illusions, while the philosopher is likened to someone who builds knowledge, Stephanus 600d. The artist's craft is an imitation of appearances, whereas the philosopher's inquiry is aimed at understanding the essence of things. Plato's insistence on the importance of rational inquiry over artistic expression is grounded in his belief that the former leads to knowledge of the forms, while the latter leads to distraction and illusion. This leads Plato to a broader critique of how societies value artists. In Book X of the Republic, Stephanus 599a, he argues that artists are wrongly esteemed in society because they create pleasing illusions that deceive the masses. True knowledge and wisdom, in Plato's view, are found in philosophy, not in art. Plato's influence on aesthetic thought. Despite his harsh critique of art, Plato's ideas have had a lasting impact on the philosophy of aesthetics. His distinction between appearance and reality, and his concern with the moral and social effects of art, have shaped centuries of aesthetic thought. Later philosophers, including Aristotle, who was one of Plato's students, grappled with these issues. Aristotle, while sharing some of Plato's concerns, offered a more nuanced view of art, particularly in his Poetics. Unlike Plato, Aristotle believed that art, especially tragedy, could have a cathartic effect, allowing people to purge harmful emotions and achieve a greater sense of balance. Aristotle, Poetics, 1449b. Nevertheless, the basic tension between art as imitation and art as a source of truth remains central to discussions in aesthetics. Plato's suspicion of art also influenced later philosophical traditions, such as early Christian thought, which was often skeptical of art and its potential to lead people away from spiritual truth. Similarly, during the Enlightenment, philosophers like Immanuel Kant explored the relationship between aesthetics, morality, and reason, further developing the ideas Plato introduced. On conclusion, a balanced view of Plato's aesthetics. In concluding, it is important to recognize that Plato's critique of art was not absolute. While he was highly critical of mimetic art, he did acknowledge the importance of beauty and its role in elevating the soul. In the Symposium, for example, Plato discusses the idea of ascending from the appreciation of physical beauty to the contemplation of the form of beauty itself. Stephanus 2:10a. This process, known as the ladder of love, suggests that beauty can play a crucial role in guiding the soul towards higher truths. However, Plato's ultimate concern was that art, when misused or misunderstood, could lead people away from the forms and into the world of illusion. His suspicion of art is deeply connected to his broader philosophical project of seeking truth and justice, both for the individual and for society. Thus, when we consider Plato's critique of art, it's essential to place it within the context of his theory of forms and his ethical concerns about the soul and the polis. Art, for Plato, is a double-edged sword. It has the potential to inspire and uplift, but it also has the capacity to deceive and mislead. In Plato's ideal society, the role of art must be carefully controlled to ensure that it promotes virtue and truth rather than illusion and vice.